Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Friday, September 28th, 2018. LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. It's time for the Judiciary Committee to meet and ignore all of what happened yesterday and vote exactly the way they were going to vote before the hearings extended into a fifth day. In fact, before there were ever any hearings, and everybody's going to vote the party line. More or less, I would think. I don't look for, well, I guess if there's any place to look for a show of independence for any reason whatsoever by any of the Republicans, it would be in the committee vote, which essentially doesn't matter. They can essentially defeat him in committee and simply report him out or report his nomination out to the full Senate with no recommendation, and then just do the basic whip count and see if they can put together a majority to place him on the Supreme Court and have that be that. So, I don't know. I'm not sure how closely I would watch the committee vote today. If, like I said, if for any reason there are any Republicans who feel like they need to distance themselves at all, they can do that today and have it make no difference whatsoever because the world's greatest deliberative body works so well. Well, that's the way it is. And of course, one by one, the senators who were holding out, who were the reason we were able to say, and I think pretty definitively it was true at the time, that there weren't the votes to confirm Kavanaugh earlier in the week, can now switch their votes and become votes to confirm Kavanaugh next week. It's entirely possible that is what they're going to do. It's entirely possible, I guess, that somebody has some sort of nervous breakdown and defies Trump and stands in the way of this. But I'm not certain who I think that would be and whether it will be enough. Now that Joe Manchin says he'll probably vote for Kavanaugh, that would be, I was going to say it would be one of the ultimate ironies. But then again, the other credibly accused sexual offender on the Supreme Court now was, of course, placed there thanks to the agreement of Democrats who could otherwise have stopped him and didn't and allowed him onto the Supreme Court. So, there's good reason to be angry with some of them too, but I don't think you should. That doesn't mean you should lose your primary focus on being angry at the people who do this sort of thing and apologize for this sort of thing, as opposed to jumping out of the way of a political mess later on. There is a slight difference between it. It was a remarkable set of hearings yesterday. Remarkable in as much as I once made an attempt to watch some of them. But of course, the time at which I was able to actually try and tune in was the time at which they took a break from the hearings, and I didn't get to see very much. However, I did watch everyone watch them, and I saw pretty much the same things that the rest of you did. And, I guess it's adequately summed up in Bill's morning tweet, which has a lot to do with my morning tweets. Daily Co's Radio is live now. That's the other part of the message that Bill conveys here. Kagro X, that's me. David Waldman tries to figure out if what he watched yesterday, part of it anyway, was a Senate confirmation hearing or an Alcoholics Anonymous intervention. If you haven't seen the exchange between Senator Amy Klobuchar and that Bart O'Kavanaugh guy yesterday, you really missed out. This is the sort of thing that ordinarily, right, when things are normal, would cost you your job, cost you the seat on the Supreme Court that you were looking for. But, of course, we don't live in normal times. This guy completely forgets his place, completely forgets he's there in a job interview, and fights with Senator Klobuchar, who's asking him about his history of drinking. And I've never seen anything quite like this, but then again, what's the point of saying that? Everything is brand new here, and LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. She asks him, have you ever have you ever, ask him about blackout drunkenness, essentially. And first he just starts out by asking about drinking, and he, right off the bat, is like, well, I'm sure you've had a beer. You probably like beer. Yeah. Have you left? Am I interviewing like your 11-year-old kids here? I've never seen anything quite like this. And then she asks him about, well, have you ever drink so much that you can't remember what happened the next day? Well, you're talking about blackouts. Yeah, I know. No, I never have done that. And I'd be curious to know whether you have. He tries to like turn the question around. Like I said, like an 11-year-old kid might arguing with their parents. Have you ever done it? Well, have you? And normally that's not sort of really, this is going to be really interesting when we see Kavanaugh writing later on, whether on the Supreme Court or back at the D.C. Circuit if something goes really wrong, or from an angry job posting at a remote Siberian university if everything goes as it should, about the proper deference to Congress and the legislative branch, especially in their oversight capacity. So this is going to make things difficult for him to sit as a competent jurist, except no one cares about competency anymore. It does put him in jeopardy of running right past the line of good behavior, which would ordinarily get you impeached. But, the question of removal from office still depends on partisan Republicans voting against their partisan interests, and that's not going to happen. But it was really incredible as she asked him, have you ever had enough, had so much to drink that you can't remember? Well, have you? I was amazed by that. And just like, it was all, wow. I'm amazed by the composure, and I guess we can say shown by all the women at the hearing yesterday. Of course, there were no Republican women senators there. There aren't any on the Judiciary Committee, which is why they hired this outside counsel to do their questioning for them. And she was remarkably composed too. And she had reason to be upset with them as well in the end, as I understand it, and probably was not. But lots of people remarking, lots of writing, lots of commentary today on how much traditional gender roles controlled what we saw yesterday. That Ford has clearly as much right to be angry about what happened as, I guess, as Kavanaugh has to fake being angry about what happened because he did it and he shouldn't be doing this. But although I will say, I think one of the more plausible explanations of the whole situation is what a lot of people have expressed, that they're both convinced that they're telling the truth, and that they are, as far as they understand it, that it's entirely possible that Dr. Ford remembers this 100% accurately, that Brett Kavanaugh is the one who did this thing, and that this thing was done in the manner described. And it could also absolutely be the case, without blackout drunkenness, by the way, I would say, that Brett Kavanaugh has no memory of this thing whatsoever, and so therefore believes that he's being wrongly accused. I don't think that's actually impossible, and I don't even think that it's actually unlikely. This would be seared in the memory of Christine Blasey Ford because it was a huge trauma for her. And it could just as easily be erased, wiped from the memory of Brett Kavanaugh, because this was both routine for him and unremarkable in any way for him. Or I'd say it's even possible that he did or does have some memory of it. And I mean, if he still retains that memory actively, then of course he's just lying. But I wouldn't be surprised if he did retain some memory of it and was repressing it, was so ashamed of what had happened, like his friend Mark Judge is about his treatment of other women that the Georgetown prep gang apparently engineered their drunkenness and passing out. And, well, you know the story from there. And he was full of remorse for that, but at least he remembered it. But other people, cringing at the memory, however hazy it may be, of something like this might very well either repress it or may not have formed a long-term memory of it. Memory's a weird thing, that's for sure. But I do want to entertain the possibility that he, even without being ashamed of it, without any sort of psychological tricks, just doesn't remember having done that because it was unremarkable to him, which is a bad story all by itself. But, there's plenty of things that I've done, some of which were, I guess, probably bad. Who knows? I don't remember that I did them. Some of which were bad, some of which were not. Some are just routine. Where did you go to eat lunch that day? I don't know. I didn't make space for that in my memory. It was totally unremarkable. What'd you have for lunch in third grade? I don't know. I can't remember. I only remember that on days where the school lunch was chicken chow mein, I didn't want it. Other than that, I think I liked the pizza, although I didn't like the cheese wedge that came with it. You tell me why that works. There's lots of things you don't remember, and it's how as obscene as it is that it would be unremarkable to someone like Brett Kavanaugh to have been involved in that kind of a sexual assault. I don't know, given what we were discussing yesterday, that it was chiefly done for the benefit of male onlookers, it might not stand out in his mind. The reason for it, the motivation for it was all about his friends and the way they laughed and enjoyed mistreating women, and they did it so routinely and so habitually that there was another girl, and it would have stood out in his mind if it had resulted in, I don't know how to really put it. I guess certainly, if he'd gone any further, it might have made an impression on him. And I guess even in all of this performative acting out of their mistreatment for women, I think, by the way, what underlies a lot of it is, not only should we do it and have fun, and we can always say, dismiss it. It was a joke. It was a joke. I didn't rape her. It was a joke. I was just kidding. If she was really going to get upset or really fight and object, I'll let her go. And then say, hey, relax. It's just a joke. And I think that sort of rationalization for it helped them a lot. But I think underlying all of that is, well, there's always the off chance that either A, she's too drunk to realize what's going on, or B, actually maybe kind of likes me anyway and would be happy to have the opportunity to respond in a consensual way. I'm sure that fantasy underlay a lot of what they did, and if they get it, hey, great, go for it. At which point, by the way, he'd probably say, all right, Mark, why don't you give us the room? But having the friend there not only accomplishes the performative aspects of things that we talked about yesterday, but also allows him to fall back on the old, well, it was a joke thing. If I was seriously trying to woo her in some actually hopefully more respectful way, I would want that to be private. And hey, if it turns into something like that, then you're going to have to get out of here. So, I don't know. I have my doubts about that whole situation, just in terms of, it was set up from the beginning to be deniable, at least as a joke in all of this. But at any rate, the thing that I find, the thing I find most plausible is that this was nothing special in any way, and it was something he tried all the time with the girls that he knew, and so it wouldn't stand out in his mind, and he has literally no memory of it, which translates at this point to, look, if I don't remember it and you're insisting it happened, I have to believe you're a liar if I really just don't remember it at all. Or, of course, it could be that there's something in there somewhere and he's just saying, look, this is a play that I think I can make. I've been counseled by the White House. Deny, 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 fight, fight, fight. And that's what MAGA people love, and I'll just try it. And similar to the strategy with the girls, hey, who knows? Maybe it'll work out and she'll actually be interested in having an actual relationship instead of me just, pressing her for sex and seeing what happens. Who knows? Maybe I'll just end up on the Supreme Court. After all, I guess it's a similar play in that respect. Anyway, I see here via Twitter that Paul Waldman was likewise shocked at the way Kavanaugh treated Senator Klobuchar, and everybody else, really, and saying, I was shocked and horrified by Kavanaugh's tantrum, but I'm a liberal. And here we run into the big problem. Conservatives, on the other hand, have been fed a steady diet of outrage and anger for years. It's the lens through which they view politics. They're going to eat it up and declare his testimony a home run. And I think largely that's pretty much what happened. Even as Fox News was covering it yesterday and saying Ford was running away with it and that Kavanaugh looked like an angry wacko, that play was for perhaps an audience of one, but I think there are probably more members of the audience that enjoy anger and a fighting spirit is what they would see in all this. And I don't know whether that will be successfully rallied into a force that pushes Republican senators to stick with the game plan and plow right through. The answer is no, right? As originally planned, as originally announced by Mitch McConnell, or what? We won't see a vote to confirm him until at least early next week. I believe the plan is to have the vote on reporting the nomination out of committee today, Friday, and keeping the Senate in session and I guess starting the 30-hour cloture clock, maybe getting a cloture vote on Saturday with an eye towards being able to move on to a vote on the underlying nomination by Monday. So that does give us the weekend and the weekend news cycle to discuss it. Now, of course, that may also mean that every Sunday news chat show has a panel of 4 Republicans talking about how credible and believable Kavanaugh was and how genuine and how he showed his passion, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe a few neutral journalists to say, well, he said and then she said, and what can you do? And no Democrats available. Or, they might. They put on enough of a show that they might feel like they need to put one of these Democratic senators on there to say the opposite and, and be outnumbered on the panel and move forward. Or, I guess for that matter, just for a twist, they could present it from a Democratic perspective and then shrug their shoulders on Monday when the thing gets passed and say, well, golly, it's Trump's party now, and everyone else can go back to writing books about what they're saying to one another in bars and diners all across Trump country. There's no way, to know exactly how it's going to play out, but large parts of it will be frustrating. Let's say that. Let's see. Do I have this? I do have the audio, or I have that video clip of the exchange, and it's pretty short. Maybe I can bring up that thing in case you didn't. If there's any member of the audience, I find it hard to believe, that didn't hear the exchange between Kavanaugh and Klobuchar. I would be surprised if I bring it up on this computer. Will that play the sound? Let's see. Let me crank up the volume on that.
You've probably had beers, Senator, and so
you're saying there's never been a case where you drank so much that you didn't remember what happened the night before or part of what happened?
You're asking about, blackout. I don't know. Have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? It's
a wow moment right there. I can't believe that she keeps her composure in that instance. I mean, have you? like, I mean, on TV, the crusty police veteran at this point says, I'm asking the questions here, Kavanaugh. But she doesn't go that route. But just as easily, I mean, I can't believe she didn't lose it on him. But again, the gender roles that you're supposed to play here, I guess, prevented her from doing this. But I think he knows that, and I think that's probably why he didn't do anything like that to any. I don't think he did that to any male senators, at least not exactly like that. But I mean, why not? You'd think that she would answer him along the lines of, well, you know, what do you mean, have I? I'm asking you the question. Her version of it is, well, can you just answer the question? And that's a pretty good one in terms of not getting flustered. But he presses it again, which is amazing. Let's listen to this part.
That's not happened. Is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Yeah, nor do I.
Okay, thank you.
That was an amazing exchange. And by the way, I wish you could have seen his face. I hope you did on that one. There's this weird sheepish grin that then turns to a scowl after that, nor do I. And that's the part that had me confused. Is this an Alcoholics Anonymous intervention? Because that's exactly what goes on when you say, you need to, you know, you have a drinking problem. No, I don't. Or sometimes people will say, I understand. I'm with you because I have a drinking problem just like you. Well, I know you do, but I don't. That sort of defiance. Although I will say that's also part of the psychology of these 12-step programs. It's built right in that if you deny you have a problem, that you have a problem. Although people who don't have a problem will also likely deny that they don't have a problem, and then you're kind of stuck. Like, I've never taken a drink in my life, let's say, and you say, you have a drinking problem. No, I don't. See, you do because you're denying it. Well, but I don't drink, actually, at all. But I guess that's a different situation. But here, just that whole thing where he says, again, he reiterates, well, you're asking about blackouts, and I don't know, I'm curious, have you ever had a blackout? And again, it's like, it's super interesting to me, Judge Kavanaugh, that you're curious about whether or not I've done this or that, but I have my job. You're still looking to get your job. This is a job interview at bottom. Answer the question when I ask it, and then shut your goddamn mouth until you hear another one. I mean, that's the way you really ought to be playing with a guy that's just belligerent. But of course, a woman could never do that because then she would be a shrill bitch, right? We saw a lot of this sort of behavior yesterday. Lots of analysis about what the manner in which the two witnesses presented themselves, and how, while everyone understood that Dr. Ford had every right to be angry, and she had to find a way, though, to express her anger in an acceptable fashion. And that, in America and elsewhere, is women are allowed to express their anger if it's disguised as sadness. That's an emotion we're allowed to allow women to have. Men, of course, can have that scowl, that flash of anger, shouting, their faces can turn red. Although, I will say, I did see a lot of pictures being tweeted around of Kavanaugh's scowl and shouting, and Lindsey Graham's twisted face and shouting. He's a whole other case in there. And of course, you always see Donald Trump doing things like that. I remember, I'm so old, I remember when media training people, media experts, told everybody, well, certainly all the Democrats, if you make a face like this, if you show anger like this, you've lost. You'll lose the whole thing. You'll lose the vote. You'll lose the issue. You'll lose the audience. They will dislike you. It's poison. It's death. Whatever you do, don't show this. And then, of course, we elected one of the guys president, this other guy who ran against him and said he was a clown and an idiot and a moron, has switched his tune and now says he's a brilliant genius and he'll do anything he can to help him. And his face goes twisty, red, and ugly. Kavanaugh is doing the same thing. And they're all, what if they all win? What does it mean? It will still be counseled that it will lose. And we would, too. I mean, like a lot of other people were pointing out, think back to Howard Dean and what happened to him. And he wasn't even actually angry. He was just excited and passionate and all those things that everybody's going to say Brett Kavanaugh was in his anger. And Howard Dean wasn't even angry. He just looked like it, I guess, in the still frame photo. And I guess that could be happening. Except, those of you who actually watched the hearings saw that it was a sustained thing and a definite sign of anger, as opposed to me who saw still frames of things and drew that conclusion. So I'll draw on your conclusion. Do you think he was angry? Do you think it mattered? Didn't seem to make much of a difference. But what an amazing, exchange that is. And you almost had to ask him in all seriousness, but rather than ending the questioning there, as you have your 5 minutes and all, and it was disappointing to see that come to a finish. But you'd think you could just sneak in one more question and just be like, seriously, I'm not kidding here. Are you drunk or possibly blackout drunk right now? People used to say that you turned belligerent, you were a mean drunk, and I mean, what in the world are you doing? You're at a job interview. How dare you? But, there's no collegiality among senators of different parties these days. For the old days when they used to sit down for drinks at the end of the day. Yeah, well, in a sense, it used to be true that senators from the Republican Party would be outraged at the treatment of a fellow senator. But of course, she's not a fellow. So, and also she's a Democrat. And boy, there was an aspect of that partisanship on display yesterday, too, from the judge himself. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. A few more things to catch up on, probably a million things to catch up on the Kavanaugh hearing. But, you've seen them all, but I don't know. I feel like we want to round these up. By the way, Monica has this to say. You remember Monica tweeting as Mommy CA20, California 20. Did I ever confirm that? I can't even remember because I was blackout drunk at the time. But just her comment here, I wished Klobuchar did not answer his question, and that would have been better. I mean, in a way, right? And by the way, he did ask Sheldon Whitehouse also if he liked beer. Do you like beer? Do you like rape? I mean, what kind of question is that? Do you like beer? I understand what you're trying to get at, but we're asking you questions about sexual assault. So, I mean, I guess if we're just going to play that game, do you like sexual assault? Do you like rape? I think the girls' basketball team would like to know that. I'm just asking on their behalf. I mean, you can play hardball, but Democrats don't. They don't do this sort of thing. Or maybe it occurs to them and they just think better of it, and maybe they're right. But Monica goes on to say, as someone who regularly interviews people, I was flabbergasted by his performance. But, they're just not normal people. It doesn't work that way. It would have been better for her not to answer the question. It would have been very interesting to just follow it up with the same answer, right? Well, have you? Can you just answer the question, maybe, Judge? I mean, this is a question and answer thing. I ask the question, you answer it. Well, I'm just curious. Have you ever? Again, you're not cooperating, Judge. Answer the question. Well, I'm just curious whether you have. I understand that you're curious. That's great on your time. will you please answer the question? This is really simple. You've seen it in courtrooms all your life. Answer the question. Well, why should I answer the question if you don't answer the question? Because I'm the person who asks questions, and you're the person who answers them. That is the role we're playing here. Just as I'm playing the role of the person who can't get emotional, and you are playing the person who can do whatever the hell he wants, answer the question. Otherwise, I have no choice but to assume that you did do this. That's basically it. And by the way, yeah, she kind of even approached that backwards. But again, heat of the moment, she was probably flabbergasted too. But it's interesting that she even extends him the courtesy of saying that she assumes that his non-answer, his belligerent non-answer, his angry, belligerent, defiant non-answer is a no, which is amazing because I think the right answer is I'm going to assume that it's a yes. She actually said, how did she put it? I'm going to assume that you're saying no, that didn't happen. Why? Why would you do that? But again, heat of the moment is the real answer. And, you always think of something better to say 10 seconds after you actually do it. So, look, we all have that problem. But that's too bad. That might have been. You know what? So what? So it might have been a more effective response to him. And then what? Then Republicans would all vote for him. As we're seeing right now, by the way, the breaking news this morning, getting around to asking Republicans how they're going to actually vote on this. Bob Corker, who was all about, well, we need to hear from her and have hearings, and blah, blah, he's a yes. Jeff Flake, who, of course, is going to do the same thing he always does. I'm so upset with these. My party has left me. Oh, how are you going to vote? Oh, I'm going to vote yes. Yeah, he's a yes, too. And soon enough, we'll hear that the rest of them are yeses, too. Unless Mitch McConnell is counting so carefully that he's including things like Manchin being a yes and then gives Murkowski and, if necessary, Collins a pass on voting so that they can vote no, so that they'll make up the votes with Democratic ones. By the way, one of these days, a great play on this would be for someone like Joe Manchin to say, well, I've considered all the yada yada, blah, 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 blah. But I'm going to vote yes. And then McConnell tells Murkowski, you're free to vote no if you absolutely have to, because we're going to get Manchin, and then just have Manchin vote no and see what Murkowski does. Just, they'll be able to handle the play, and she'll realize all on her own, oh, this is not the scenario we imagine. I'm going to have to vote yes on this one, but it's going to make me pissed, and then she's going to sweat bullets when she does it. Or, of course, you can always go back and change your vote later on. Manchin could, of course, vote yes and then change his vote later to be no, but then at that point, then Murkowski would, and that would be even more funny, because you'd see Murkowski hustle in there and say, wait a minute, I changed my mind, I vote yes. That would be really amazing. That would expose something. But, that's not something senators do to one another because of Senate collegiality, like sitting by and watching Kavanaugh try and turn questions around on fellow senators. They wouldn't stand for that sort of thing. Unless, of course, they would stand for that sort of thing. That is weird. Well, you're watching that happen once again. This is something that Democrats do and Republicans don't. Lindsey Graham went bananas yesterday also, and I understand he was heard in the hallway telling during one of the breaks that he was heard telling reporters that, and this is another theme that emerged from this. Do I have that tweet? I can't even, I'll have to scroll back and see if I can find the exact comments. But he was heard telling people that this was all, a plot by the left and Democrats, et cetera, et cetera. Here it is. Brian Beutler was tweeting out about this comment. I don't know whether he overheard it himself or somebody else passed it on. Lindsey Graham just falsely told a bunch of reporters that Democrats are never subjected to accusations of sexual misconduct, like Al Franken or whatever, and warned them that if Kavanaugh fails, Republicans will gin up false accusations against future Democratic nominees to even the score. And then gives it a wow. And I agree. And by the way, let's not forget, since I wanted to bring him up for this purpose, let's not forget that Lindsey Graham is one of the totally sincere former members of the old Gang of 14, the middle-of-the-road, moderate senators who banded together across party lines. They reached across the aisle in order to stop the Senate from destroying itself and bring it back to the old days of collegiality where members of both parties could fight like hell during the day and retire to drinks at night together and a game of poker. And by gum, it was just all so fun and friendly and civilized and whatnot. This was a guy who had supposedly signed on to an agreement to block the use of the nuclear option by Republicans and block the use of judicial filibusters by Democrats, except in extraordinary circumstances. Now, I think we're in extraordinary circumstances here. Of course, that was a deal, and I was clear on this at the time, that was a deal that only extended to the end of that current Congress. I think it was like to the end of 2005 or so. And so technically it wasn't binding past then. But I think everybody correctly assigned it, incorrectly, I guess, assigned it some additional meaning as if it were a position that senators were staking out for their entire careers. And that clearly wasn't the case. But Lindsey Graham was one of those people who at the time found value in portraying himself as a moderate. And for him to now say that as a matter of strategy, Republicans would, if Kavanaugh fails, and it's not entirely clear whether this would obtain even if Kavanaugh doesn't fail. Clearly he's so angry he now thinks it's fair game for Republicans to gin up accusations, false accusations, against future Democratic nominees to even the score. That's so wrong on so many levels. Like, one, to admit that I will use the power of my Senate office to falsely accuse Democratic nominees of XYZ, no matter who they are, but so long as they are nominated by a Democratic president, really by itself should spark an ethics investigation. But in a Republican Senate, it won't. And quite honestly, in a Democratic Senate, it won't either. But it should. Though I think it would end up being inconclusive, and he would just say, oh, I was just spouting off, etc. But what a thing to say. A totally irresponsible admission for a senator to make. And then secondly, on a secondary level, the idea of evening the score this way. Now, because I was involved in that whole, both in the early nuclear option fight and, honestly, also because I was involved in the discussions of the propriety of bringing impeachment to bear during the George W. Bush administration, I am familiar with the Republican approach to condemning, and it's not even just a Republican approach. They are in complete complicity here. The press loved the line of condemning the very idea of even considering impeachment for George W. Bush as tit for tat. A tit for tat response. They were going to, that impeaching George W. Bush was only about revenge for Clinton. As though I was motivated personally, like the thing I got to do is avenge Bill Clinton. Yeah, that's on my mind every day. Bill Clinton's doing fine on his own. That is to say, he really should be in trouble for the things that he did on his own. And I have nothing to do with them. And, if you ask me about what kind of person he is, you say he's a brilliant and extraordinary politician. He's got a great, I don't know what, a mind for selling policy. pretty good one for formulating policy, although there are several policies that he formulated with which I disagree, though I do think it's entirely possible that he landed on some of those policy formulations, some of the tougher decisions about policy formulations for purely political reasons, as opposed to policy preferences he may have held himself. But that's part of what makes him a brilliant politician, getting things hammered out like that. But he has some tragic personal flaws, to say the very least, and he disappointed us all with them. But I don't know why, I don't understand why I'm supposed to have to defend the guy. But tit for tat, no, if you are wiretapping people without warrants, if you are torturing people in contravention to our own law, our own constitution, international law, etc., you warrant impeachment all by yourself. Doesn't really matter to me that there was another guy who also did wrong in a completely different area. That doesn't make any sense. But tit for tat was like a mark of death that the media and Republicans were imposing on the idea, circulating among people who happened to be Democrats, that the Constitution and our laws meant something, and that flouting them in as dramatic a fashion as George W. Bush did, monitoring the communications of our own citizens without warrant, torturing people for political gain, no less. It really didn't matter to me at that point what Bill Clinton did. I don't even have to say may or may not have done. He did it. It's bad. He should be in trouble for it. And I'm supposed to take that into consideration. Well, I don't know. Maybe torture now is okay because Bill Clinton was also bad. No, that doesn't ring true to me. It doesn't make any sense. But that was the line, and the media loved it. Tit for tat. You can't consider impeachment. That's for crazy people, because tit for tat. Here's Lindsey Graham comes out and basically says Republican policy from now on is going to be tit for tat. And everybody's like, wow, I mean, that's really angry and crazy, but not like, oh, that's off the rails insane. That's just like, well, that's just a Republican senator having a fighting spirit. A member of the Gang of 14, eh? He was so sincere about that. By the way, speaking of stupid media themes, I noticed that Media Matters caught this one too. I saw them tweet out Chuck Todd saying Democrats would have more credibility in the Christine Blasey Ford hearing if it weren't coming across as a support group. I didn't read the article that accompanied that, but that sounds rather annoying and just sort of struck me as a dang. Chuck Todd thinks Democrats are overprepared again. To imagine coming away from the hearing with that. That's the impression. They're supporting her too much. Wow. Okay. I can't help you. I don't think. You should maybe talk to a therapist. That's pretty ugly. Anyway, it was an incredible day yesterday. An incredible day, I thought, on the show for ourselves. I had an incredible time reading those stories and theories about performative male performative male sexual abuse, essentially, that just really made things so much clearer in my mind. I really understood, I felt like what was going on an awful lot better. Let's see. Also, I guess I should note for the record, Sam Stein had a tweet that I thought made a lot of sense at the beginning of Kavanaugh's portion of the hearing, where it became clear that he was going to be quite angry and belligerent in all of this, and people couldn't believe it. And I think the initial reaction from most normal times strategists were, oh no, this is death. This is a disaster for the Republicans. This is exactly what they don't want. And Sam Stein, one of the earlier ones, saying, well, defiance and anger is sort of what Clarence Thomas did too. And everybody's been comparing this to the Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill hearings. And he's right. Clarence Thomas did come out angry and bitter and defiant, and it did work. And those were different times, perhaps, different person, some other various factors, let's say, that might have scared people off from being tougher on Thomas than they were. But I don't know. I guess the times aren't that different, because it seems to have worked for Kavanaugh as well, at least in terms of Republican senators saying, yeah, I'm ignoring the whole thing. I don't really actually care very much. I don't know. It was a hell of a day, to say the very least. And then, of course, yelling, angry Brett Kavanaugh. Apparently nobody took that as an indication of, maybe the 65 women, some of whom have already retracted their support for Kavanaugh, maybe they're swearing to us that he was always, at all times, respectful and behaved honorably. Gee whiz, maybe they were just caught by surprise yesterday. But again, that just put the lie to that among 100 other things that were put to lie yesterday. In addition, Kavanaugh was very clearly partisan in many of his remarks, and blaming the left and Democrats and seeing conspiracy theories all over the place against him. It's going, again, in normal times, it would be very difficult to understand how that squares with judicial temperament, and there's simply no way that he could credibly serve on the bench at this point. Here's a tweet from Will Wilkinson that I noticed yesterday. Cavs' furious, hyper-partisan airing of anti-democratic grievance amounts to a confession of his inability to approach cases without deeply emotional partisan bias, which is, of course, why the Republicans nominated him. So that's not going to disturb them. Just should be on the record for the rest of us. If you come before Kavanaugh in court and he finds out you're a member of the Democratic Party, you can't get justice from that guy, and that's kind of an institutional problem we're going to have to deal with. That's not the way this whole thing is supposed to work. Oh, anger works, so I can try.
That is not how this works!
That is correct, Brett. That is not how this works. I'm sorry, but you're not. Are you supposed to be angry and belligerent and express partisan preferences from the bench?
No!
Oh, well, if you don't know that, I don't know if I can help you.
Well, what the hell is supposed to do, you moron?
I guess you're supposed to play all your sound effects, because every once in a while I get on a sound effects kick. What the hell are you supposed to do, you moron? You're not supposed to tell people that you're going to view people from one of the two major political parties in this country as always wrong and a bunch of liars who are conspiring against you. There you have it. It's not good, as Donald Trump would put it. Let's see. There are a few other items in my Twitter feed from yesterday that sum things up as well. Alexandra Petri, or Pete, does she say Petri? Because of course she's making a joke about the name Petri, but is it Petri? But Petri would be funnier if her handle on Twitter is Petri Dishes. Get it? She dishes the scoop, but she might still be Petri, and it's just a written joke. But she's saying, asking about Kavanaugh, is this how people get to talk if they don't spend their entire lives being scrutinized for tone? Yes, I think so. It was pretty amazing. Let's see. Yes. Here's that theory that Kavanaugh has no memory, and so therefore thinks he's being falsely accused. Chris Hayes had tweeted that out, and Jesse Singal had agreed that this was largely the likely reason. What else have we got here? Yes, that's right. Although now I see that this is missing. The original tweet that prompted this is now missing. We'll have to check into the provenance of this story. But one of the other ridiculous moments, apparently, of the hearing, there was a moment during which Senator Harris asked Kavanaugh if he had watched Ford's testimony. And he testified that he had not watched it. And then there was this moment anyway, I guess we'll have to check in on this, when reporters were tweeting out their stories, and I don't think it was in response to this. It was just something that came out, almost at the same moment. Their stories came out just routinely noting that they had been observing Kavanaugh during Ford's testimony, and he was indeed watching Ford's testimony on a closed circuit monitor, but then exited whatever room he was in and entered the committee hearing room for his turn and turned around and told people that nope, he hadn't watched them. And that's pretty amazing. And now I'm not certain what happened to that, because let's see, first there was a tweet of Rebecca Ballhaus, who tweeted out the story initially that I had seen. And then I saw it sort of reiterated with a thread. Susan Simpson tweeting out this thread that says, news coverage of today's hearing heavily features Kavanaugh's testimony and mention, oh, this is a different thread. Okay, but Rebecca Ballhaus's tweet about about him watching on the monitor is gone, and I'm not certain what is the news of that. Have they retracted that story? Is anybody aware of what happened there? I don't know that I have the latest breaking news or the latest version of that story, though I do have this other thing to note as well from Rebecca Ballhaus, this saying, when Rachel Mitchell, the prosecutor that was hired by Republicans, earlier asked Kavanaugh if he had ever passed out from drinking, he said, I've gone to sleep, I've never blacked out. And so he was denying the whole blackout thing, and of course asking Amy Klobuchar whether she had ever blacked out. And this reminded me more than anything of Trump's no puppet, you're the puppet response. And I don't know whether he was coached in this, but that's pretty amazing too. Now, the other missing thread here is Susan Simpson noting that noting the thread of someone else's here, saying news coverage of today's hearing. This is the I guess maybe the last couple points about this thing. Maybe we can spend an hour on it today. News coverage of today's hearing heavily features Kavanaugh's testimony and mentions Blasey Ford's testimony only in passing, if at all. A lot of people were saying that the initial news response, the news coverage of this thing was, and I don't know whether they thought that it put him in sufficiently bad light simply to highlight that he had given belligerent testimony. But that's another way of viewing how they handled it. But there didn't seem to be much in the way of noting, hey, there was this very equally passionate and equally moving, more so, I think, than, because the other guy was lying, more moving than Kavanaugh's testimony was Ford's, and there just really wasn't much upfront discussion about what happened and what she had to say, and the vast majority of people couldn't just stop what they were doing and watch the hearings. So, we do sometimes fall into that bubble through no fault of our own. In this case, an event is happening and you stop to watch it. That's what an informed citizen should do. But the vast majority of people didn't watch it. And if they hear about it at all, they'll hear about it from the news. And it's not entirely clear that they're going to get any news about what Ford had to say. Just that Kavanaugh said he didn't do it and he was really angry about it. And gosh, it may have worked. I'm a little worried about that. I had a little experience with that one yesterday, too. I was driving around doing some errands and listening to WTOP, the news radio station here in the capital area, and listening to their coverage. And there was a very weird report of how their Hill reporters, what their Hill reporters were hearing from Republican senators. And this goes back to the tit for tat thing, I think. TOP radio was reporting that Republican senators, I guess after meeting and discussing things among themselves, they think that it was WTOP's conclusion that Republican senators think the Kavanaugh controversy is payback for Merrick Garland. So we have, on the one hand, we got Lindsey Graham saying, you better look out, Democrats, because you're going to get payback for the Kavanaugh nomination later on. So Lindsey Graham is, of course, saying, I'm going to give you payback for your payback, which is what we call escalation. The second payback isn't payback, it's escalation. Republicans do something. If there's payback for it, you can't pay back the payback. I mean, you can, and they will, and that's another theme of the day. If they can do it, they will. But this is really interesting. So more to the point and more to the immediate point is if the news radio guys are reporting that Republican senators think the Kavanaugh controversy is payback for Merrick Garland, that's bad enough because that just plants the idea in people's minds, casual observers, the idea in their mind that it is payback for Merrick Garland. And payback is a bad thing, generally speaking, it's a bad thing to get from your adults in the room. Anyway, it's a good thing if my guy does payback and MAGA. But anyway, the thinking, therefore, they must think, Republicans must have reached the conclusion, whether they really believe it or they just find it necessary to justify their votes, that Ford was lying. It has to be the case, because if they think this is payback for Merrick Garland, and then they think that Democrats are mad about Garland, which they are, well, and we are, it's true, and Dems are mad about Garland, but if you again, just like with the impeachment of George W. Bush, you investigate credible sexual assault allegations entirely independent of Garland's blocking. It doesn't have to be tit for tat. There doesn't even have to be a Merrick Garland to do what they did yesterday with Brett Kavanaugh. To regard it as payback is ludicrous. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Just that 1 minute break. I could have used a 10-minute break on this one, but when we last left off, I was discussing how crazy it is, just in this one small point, that Democrats, though they are mad about Garland, investigating credible allegations of sexual assault doesn't have to have anything to do with Garland. I mean, if are you saying that if they had let Merrick Garland go, let him go through, and he was on the court instead of Neil Gorsuch, that if Brett Kavanaugh came to the Senate and somebody made a credible accusation of sexual assault against him, that Democrats would have said, I'm not interested. To hell with it, because what are you going to do? I mean, Merrick Garland's on the court. So who cares, right? Now, of course, I guess what's really happening here is Senate Republicans are saying that Democrats, and you've likely reached this conclusion, it won't surprise you to learn that Republicans think Democrats put Ford up to lying about sexual assault perpetrated by Brett Kavanaugh, so that those accusations would derail his nomination, as though that would mean, well, that's that. President Trump can't nominate anybody else. That's the end of the game. It's going to be an 8-8 court, and we can just wait for the next Democratic president now to break that tie. That's not going to happen. And, of course, people have pointed out, why didn't they do that to Neil Gorsuch or anybody else, for that matter? And the answer is because, it's a ridiculous thing to say, and that's not happening. But Republicans believe that, and that's pretty important to be aware of. It's pretty important to note that Senate Republicans either, and I mean, some can hold one view and others can hold a different view, just so long as they, from their perspective, just so long as they come to the same conclusion of how to vote. There can be any number of reasons to vote the way you vote, just so long as you do vote yes. Senate Republicans could either think Ford's lying, they could think she's telling the truth and not care. They could believe in the conspiracy theory. They might not. It doesn't really matter. But it's just doubly interesting, I think, that they are able to get the news media to say, without blinking, that, well, of course, we view this thing as payback from the Democrats for Merrick Garland, which, again, is an amazing thing. And you could and should be asking, I don't understand, what do you think the Senate should normally be doing with credible accusations of sexual assault? Of course, Republicans would object. Well, it's not a credible accusation of sexual assault. It's a lie about sexual assault. But between that and Graham's promise that Republicans, as a matter of policy, are going to start making up allegations against Democratic nominees now as payback for the payback for the payback. Yeah, you don't have to pay back investigating allegations of sexual assault. Unless, of course, you actually truly believe that she's fabricating the story. And there's sort of more and different angles to this still, but it's just I can't stress it enough how distressing it is that Republicans are able to convince themselves that this is somehow part of a conspiracy against conservatives and get the news media to agree to frame it that way. That's really the most disturbing part. And there's another, when did this occur? Because I know that I think shortly after that, there was another incident in the press reporting or passing on the views of some Republican that I thought, again, how is it that you guys don't recognize right off the bat that there's something way wrong with this formulation and then say so? Here we are. This is a tweet, came from Brian Karem, Karem, who is executive editor of Sentinel newspapers and, look at this, White House reporter for Playboy and political analyst for CNN. So, okay, right? In and around politics all the time. Where did this one go? All right, I have to keep scrolling. I had to go and look at his profile in order to give you his background. But, yeah, here's the tweet. Senator Graham says he has never seen anything like this and claims no one has gone to such extremes to hold back a SCOTUS nominee. Now, Brian makes the easier and more obvious play here, and it's not wrong, but he says, hey, remember Merrick Garland, anyone? But that only contributes to the framing of Republicans being able to say, well, this is payback for Merrick Garland. Now, I don't fault him for doing that because it's true, to say something like no one's ever gone to such extremes to hold back a SCOTUS nominee. Obviously, you have to say, duh, Merrick Garland, 2 seconds ago, of course. But it does help contribute to their framing, but it does have the benefit of being true. I think a better answer, since Kavanaugh gets to ask questions back of his questioners, I'll grant myself the same privilege. Why not ask Senator Graham, hey, what's extreme exactly about investigating credible allegations of sexual assault? It's what we're supposed to do in a law and order society. Somebody comes forward with accusations of sexual assault. You determine the preliminary, determination of credibility here. Once you find, well, she's not hemming and hawing and all over the place and seems to have a coherent story, let's investigate. That doesn't necessarily mean she's right or that we have to believe her, technically speaking, but, we have a credible allegation being made here. We should delve further into it because that's where we are as a society. Law and order. No one's above the law. Everyone's responsible for their actions. But apparently not. I'm amazed that you can get away with that kind of framing. It's such an extreme thing to do when you hear that someone sexually assaulted someone else to say, wait a minute, what happened? Did that really happen? Can you tell me about it? I think I should know that. And then I'll judge it from there. That's now extreme. This, again, from a guy who was on the Gang of 14, who, remember, their whole triggering thing was, we would be all released from this promise either not to vote for the nuclear option or not to join judicial filibusters under extreme circumstances, extraordinary circumstances, which I guess probably is a pretty close synonym for or cinnamon, if you prefer, for going to extremes. And I think, when you have a nominee that's accused of sexual assault, that's a pretty extreme thing. It doesn't happen all the time. Although now I guess maybe it does happen all the time because Lindsey Graham just promised that it would. So that's pretty out there too. It's really kind of strange what's happening about here. All right, let's see. Good theories I saw circulating about the degree or the magnitude of the Lindsey Graham hissy fits yesterday. He was so keyed up. More than a few people theorized that he was auditioning for the Attorney General job after the elections when President Trump finally gets around to a political situation in which he feels comfortable firing Jeff Sessions, and maybe Lindsey Graham auditioning for that job and putting on more performative displays for male audiences among the Republicans than just Brett Kavanaugh and his buds, we find out. Okay, it was an interesting theory and well worth noting. I also have here, let's see, this one Scott Anderson just shared with me from Raw Story, says it has some really interesting audio and video. Well, you'll only hear the audio of Jeff Flake giving his comments in which he says, yeah, I'm probably going to, going on the record and saying, yeah, he's probably going to vote for Kavanaugh after all. A group of furious women on Friday, that's today, confronted Jeff Flake in an elevator on Capitol Hill and raked him over the coals for his decision to support Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Let's see, do we have the video here so we can get that audio? Yeah, how long does this run? Let's see. 2 minutes. Well, let's listen and break it up as appropriate.
Yes,
there he is.
I understand that you said just last night you felt that the witness was in fact credible.
On Monday, I stood in front of your office with Addie Barkan. I told the story of my sexual assault. I told it because I recognized in Dr. Ford's story that she's telling the truth. What you are doing is allowing someone who actually violated a woman to sit in the Supreme Court. This is not tolerable. You have children in your family. Think about them. I have 2 children. I cannot imagine that for the next 50 years, they will have to have someone in the Supreme Court who has been accused of violating a young girl.
This is really rather, I got to break this up. Honestly, probably because of copyright issues more than anything else, but or rather the stupid algorithm that places like YouTube are going to use to say that this is a violation of copyright law, even though honestly this should be well within every exception. But an angry woman making an impassioned speech, that's not allowed. But what's happening here, if you haven't seen this video, is Flake is basically attempting to leave in an elevator, and this woman is shouting at him, I think quite appropriately, and preventing the elevator door from closing. And he is simply averting his eyes and mumbling about, I have to go. Because he's such a courageous guy. You all know about what a courageous guy he is because he makes these speeches every once in a while about how we can't let Trump get away with this stuff, or we can't let this happen to American politics, etc. I have to go. I really have to leave. You're in the way of the elevator. But let's continue on because there's more here.
What are you doing, sir?
I was sexually assaulted and nobody believed me. I didn't tell anyone, and you're telling all women that they don't matter, that they should just stay quiet because if they tell you what happened to them, you're going to ignore them. That's what happened to me, and that's what you're telling all women in America, that they don't matter. They should just keep it to themselves because if they have told the truth, they're just going to help that man to power anyway. That's what you're telling all of these women. That's what you're telling me right now. Look at me when I'm talking to you. You're telling me that my assault doesn't matter, that what happened to me doesn't matter, and that you're going to let people who do these things into power. That's what you're telling me.
I got to pause this one here. This is even more impassioned. And it seems, I guess, if you look at the video, I don't know, maybe Jeff Flake is just a great actor. But this appears to be damaging to him. Not that it's going to change anything. He's ashamed of himself to a certain extent. Not like Lindsey Graham. I think somebody else tried this same sort of confrontation style with Lindsey Graham on his way into an elevator and said, when she got around to saying, I was raped, I was sexually assaulted, he said, I'm sorry, call the cops, and then close the elevator door. And he could be forcing the issue. He's shielded by two women, I guess, on his staff. Not shielded per se, but they're there and they're mouthing the same thing. We have to go. We have to leave. We have to go. Goodbye. I have to get out of here. And they might have to go for votes or whatever. But still, I mean, honestly, it's quite a moment, and it looks for all the world like he cares about it, as opposed to Lindsey Graham. But what's going to happen at vote time, right? All the caring goes out the window if you cast that vote the wrong way.
When you vote for him, don't look away from me. Look at me and tell me that it doesn't matter what happened to me. That you'll let people like that go to the highest court of the land and tell everyone what they can do to their bodies.
Senator Flake, do you think that Brett Kavanaugh is telling the truth? Thank you. Do you think that he's able to hold the pain of this country and repair it? That is the work of justice. The way that justice works is you recognize harm, you take responsibility.
Wow. Well, that's actually the end of the clip, and it's a pretty amazing one. I'm glad I got to hear it, and all he can do is stand there and say, thank you, and sort of nod as though, again, it's either a great performance or his soul is being crushed, but, shrug emoji, I guess I'll just get crushed, and it's time to go vote for Kavanaugh. It's pretty disgusting, and it's disheartening. There was a tweet yesterday that I saw from Irene Carmon. Today is basically just trying to remember all the things that we discussed about this situation on Twitter yesterday. What did Irene have to say? She was just saying, offhandedly, like, here it is. There's something heartbreakingly idealistic about Christine Blasey Ford believing the senators in charge would genuinely want to hear from her before they voted. And that really kind of sums it up there. It was a remarkable thing to watch. And, well, what can you say? Sad about the demise of the country. Whoops. Oh, well. Bad news. It was a good run for a while, although, quite honestly, it wasn't even all that good of a run. Okay. Well, let's see. I know there are some other things here, and I just kind of I might as well just keep scrolling through the Twitter feed, and I'll remind myself of all of these various thoughts that occurred to me. Oh, yes, Dana Hoole's observation yesterday. I really love how the guy who worked for Starr is saying he didn't have sexual intercourse when that doesn't exonerate him of what is alleged, right? So you remember, of course, what happened with the Starr investigation, and I did not have sex with that woman. Well, that's not what I asked you. Right, we're asking about a very different. When you say have sex with, what do you mean by that anyway? And then, of course, that there is no relationship. It depends on what the meaning of the word is that whole thing. And now here he is out there parsing and saying, well, it's okay because I didn't have intercourse with her. No, the thing you did was wrong all by itself. It would have been far worse had you also done it, and you also had intercourse with her as the terminology. Had you raped her? That would be considerably worse. But what you did is assault, and that is bad. And it's this particularly egregious kind of assault there, too. I don't know. The whole thing is nuts, and I don't know what to say anymore. Let's see. I told you about what I heard on WTOP radio. Definitely wanted to get to that. Let's see, other things that came up yesterday. Yes, right. Just in assessing the performances given both last night and this morning, it's been really interesting watching in the press, for instance, the Associated Press in their tweet about their write-up that came out this morning. The tweet is, he let his anger flare, interrupted his questioners, and wept. She sought to present herself as cooperative and respectful. The Kavanaugh-Ford hearing provided a tutorial on gender roles and stereotypes, and a very necessary analysis, and probably we should just read it just to get it all out there and on the record, too. But I was more interested in what that meant, although maybe I can add that after their analysis. I should see how long this runs. Yeah, it looks like a pretty relatively compact analysis, and it's an important point, the dramatic lesson on gender roles. Who gets to be angry? Or as Alexandra, was it Alexandra, her first name? Petrie? I don't know any of her names. Jeez. Anyway, she's such a good writer and so funny, too. And I still screwed up her name. But it was a great observation that she made, or a great rhetorical question. Is what Kavanaugh's doing? Is that what you get to do when you're not monitored for tone all the time? So that was the lead sentence I gave you before. He let his anger flare repeatedly, interrupted his questioners, and cried several times during his opening statement. She strived to remain calm and polite despite her nervousness, and mostly held back her tears. This is David Crary writing for AP. Throughout their riveting, nationally televised testimony on Thursday, Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh served as exhibits A and B for a tutorial on gender roles and stereotypes. Amid the deluge of reaction on social media, one prominent observation: Ford, as a woman, would have been judged as a far weaker witness had she behaved as Kavanaugh did. Imagine a woman openly weeping like this on a national stage and still getting elected to the Supreme Court. Well, not elected, but okay. Or any office, tweeted Joanna Robinson, a senior writer with Vanity Fair. Kavanaugh, nominated to fill a vacant seat on the U.S. Supreme Court, mixed tears with fury in his statement, forcefully denying Ford's allegation that he sexually assaulted her in 1982 when they were both in high school. He choked up at several points when referring to how his family had been affected by the tempest surrounding allegations by Ford and other women. Opponents of Kavanaugh's nomination said his behavior demonstrated a lack of judicial temperament. It did. Some supporters say they were moved to tears when he broke down. I'm sure they were. Later, during questioning by some of the Senate Judiciary Committee's Democratic members, Kavanaugh aggressively interrupted his interrogators and even asked sharp questions of his own. By sharp, we mean angry and bitter, not clever or well thought out and effective. Don't give him that much credit. Have you ever drank so much you didn't remember what happened? Asked Senator Amy Klobuchar. Have you? Countered Kavanaugh. He later apologized. Well, too bad. Ford, in contrast, God, that's nuts. I don't know what he was thinking. Ford, in contrast, sought to present herself as cooperative and respectful, expressing her wish that, quote, we could collaborate in a way that could get at more information, unquote. I'm used to being collegial, she said at one point. Supposedly so are senators. We're constantly hearing about the collegiality and what you do and don't do to one another. Except that's BS and only Democrats abide by it. Again, I'll just tell you one more time. At another point, Ford said, when asked about her emotional state, I think that's a great question. Zoe Chance, a marketing professor at Yale School of Management, don't ask anybody at Yale, please, said that in terms of winning over public opinion, Ford and Kavanaugh are both doing the right thing. She cited research indicating that men could seem more influential and competent through shows of anger, and women less so. And that's probably true. And that's why I thought earlier in the show that I could get away with answering Kavanaugh's answering questions with another question in a way that Amy Klobuchar couldn't. Honestly, I really would like to have put it to him as angrily as that. Listen, my job is to ask the questions. Your job is to answer the questions. You want to evade the questions, I'm going to ask you to answer them all over again. That's how this dance is going to go. How do you properly respond to a question from a senator when you're a nominee for the federal bench, Judge Kavanaugh? I ask a question. you answer it. And I don't give a good goddamn what you're just curious about. When you're done answering, shut your mouth until you're asked another question. It's not an editorial board meeting. Answer. The end. I ask, you answer. You understand me? Have I made it clear to you? Do you need an interpreter? Something? Of course, then he's so bitter and angry and partisan. Yeah, even that I probably wouldn't get away with. But the point is, well made here. Women aren't allowed to do this. So, where were we? However, Chance, we're talking to Zoe Chance, the marketing professor at Yale, right? Chance was unsure that Kavanaugh's anger was effective in this case. Oh, I'm sure it was fine. In this particular situation, the emotional display casts doubt on his ability to be dispassionate and objective as a judge. Of course, people forgot that he was up for a judgeship if you were on his side. He was just a poor guy being charged unfairly. If we value the ability to separate emotion from facts, then Ford has behaved more judge-like than Kavanaugh has. Yeah, but who cares? Kathleen Hall Jamieson, communications professor and director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania, here's some Ivy League bona fides for you, said some of Kavanaugh's statements were more consistent with one's expectations of a partisan than a judge or a prospective associate justice of the Supreme Court. And that is, of course, because he is a partisan more than a judge. So, duh. But I don't know why she decides not to say that. It is unusual to see a middle-aged professional, male or female, experience the range of emotions in public in a formal setting expressed by Judge Kavanaugh. Jameson said in an email, "We expect judges to sound and seem dispassionate." Michael Cunningham, a psychology professor at the University of Louisville, wow, a non-Ivy, holy mackerel, said he found Ford's body language and tone of voice to be persuasive. Her generally calm and soft-spoken yet firm voice seemed consistent with the feminine sex role, he said. At the end, I believe she retained her credibility. And there were a lot of people who thought so, and even Republicans who said, well, she's credible. I just don't care. She's credible, and I wish she wasn't. It was apparently the reaction over at the White House. As for Kavanaugh, Cunningham said the nominee was successful in conveying the emotions of a man who has convinced himself, anyway, that he has done nothing wrong. But the professor had doubts about the impact of Kavanaugh's show of emotions. Judge Kavanaugh, tearing up when mentioning his daughter, conveyed a man who was feeling very sorry for himself, Cunningham said. Society wants men to be sympathetic and even tearful at times, but not for themselves. Glenn Sachs, a commentator who writes often about men's issues, expressed dismay at social media derision being directed at Kavanaugh due to his emotional displays. By the way, I'll just pause here to say this idea of him being tearful, being okay, but not for himself. It really was all about himself. I mean, he was so angry, and people, his supporters, saying it's so terrible that this man, his life is being ruined. And I was moved to observe yesterday what a horrible tragedy it is for a Yale Law School grad to have his career trajectory progress only to a seat on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, considered by many to be the second highest court in the land. Oh, he missed by that much being on the Supreme Court. And as you know, if you graduate from Yale Law School, well, if you're not a Supreme Court justice, it's an outrage. There should be thousands of, that's it. We need to expand the Supreme Court so that as many people as are obviously entitled to a seat on the Supreme Court can finally get one. That's finally, that's at long last, the only logical explanation for court packing. We got to handle all these snowflakes who can't handle not getting appointed to the Supreme Court. We don't want people walking around crying all the time. They'll crash their cars and hoverboards and segways in the future, I guess. Let's see. All right, let's see. We're up against our third break here, but we'll continue on with this. We're going to hear from Glenn Sachs, a commentator who writes often about men's issues, whatever that might mean. And let's see. He says that he expressed dismay at social media derision being directed at Kavanaugh due to his emotional displays. The mocking of his demeanor, he says, is indicative of the restraints still upon men. Poor men. No weakness allowed. Suck it up or get laughed at. Of course, that's the way it was in high school with those guys. He seemed okay with it then. Sachs said in an email all of this. Men are taught this at an early age. When women cry, we sympathize. When a man cries, it's so unseemly we can barely stand to look at it. I don't know if I saw any of that out there today. Well, there's more reaction and more analysis out there as well, but, we're probably about ready to move on from this particular sticking point onto one or two more before heading into the weekend. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Our last segment before heading into the weekend, so we got to make sure this one is jam-packed with all the other things we wanted to get to from the Kavanaugh hearings. I guess we'll just put on record, once again, Kavanaugh is wrong about the legal drinking age in Maryland. People finally catching up to this one in the media. The Hill reporting here. Kavanaugh incorrectly claims he could legally drink as a high school senior. I guess he made that claim all over again yesterday in front of everybody, so that sparked a new round of no, that's not true. This one here from Chris Mills Rodrigo in The Hill. Throughout his nomination process for the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh has frequently said he could legally drink beer during his senior year at Georgetown Prep in Maryland. However, the state's drinking age was raised to 21 at the end of his junior year when he was still 17, meaning that it was actually never legal for him while in high school, according to an Associated Press report. Kavanaugh's drinking habits came under scrutiny on Thursday during the hearing. We know all about that and how he submitted respectfully to the questioning about it. And by the way, like I said, you can't have it all. I mean, either a judge is going to have judicial temperament or a fundamental understanding of the state of the law, or at least even the historical state of the law. True here, Kavanaugh has neither one, but he must at least have the sterling academic record. He did go to Yale and Yale Law School. That is something. Surely author of scholarly treatise, something like that. No, none of that. Well, okay, what are we going to do? Well, what am I going to say? He's got nothing. But he does have the votes, apparently. So, well, there's that. Anyway, just thought I'd note that one for the record, in case you thought I forgot about that one. Or, I hope none of you really cared whether I forgot about that one. Let's see. A few other things. I might as well throw in one or two more observations or analyses before doing a lightning round of issues to watch during the weekend besides Kavanaugh. This one from Brian Beutler now. How Brett Kavanaugh discredited himself. How do you think he did that? It's short. It's sweet. Let's take a look. I don't know if it's sweet. We'll find out. It's usually sweet if it's coming. Brian, you're so sweet. What a sweet writer. Let's see. The sexual assault allegations against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh have unfortunately washed other doubts about his credibility out of the debate over whether he should be confirmed. Yes, another reminder that the lurid sex tales is really just icing on the cake in terms of reasons that he shouldn't be on the bench and should in fact be impeached from even his current position. His testimony Thursday even seemed to settle one of the biggest questions about his fitness for the Supreme Court, or any court, but that aspect of it has gone largely unnoticed. In a stunningly naked display of partisan invective, and these are the last 2 points I guess we want to make about it. The one about the partisanship. Let's take this up. Kavanaugh described his current predicament as, quote, a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with the apparent pent-up anger about President Trump in the 2016 election and revenge on behalf of the Clintons. He may as well have called it a rigged witch hunt and Democrat excuse for losing the 2016 election, which of course is what Trump usually says. That's a quote from him. A sitting judge who has let his political mask slip all the way down like this can't credibly continue to judge in any capacity, but least of all on the Supreme Court, where he's likely to shape decisions about Trump's own legal woes in the near future. Yet, before the allegations began piling up, that was one of the most immediate worries about Kavanaugh's nomination. Only a handful of Senate Republicans expressed any doubts about Kavanaugh, but of those, perhaps the biggest surrounded Kavanaugh's expansive views about executive power and whether it would be wise to confirm a Donald Trump nominee who'd mused publicly that presidents should perhaps be exempt from criminal investigations. Time out for my own analysis here just for a second. I want to throw this one back to yesterday, something else I brought up. The idea of vast and expanded executive power is super federalist, isn't it? Well, in a way, right? The original Federalists who were, in fact, in favor of strong central government and weakening or even basically erasing, without doing so in name, the control of the state governments. And it was originally the anti-federalists who were most suspicious of expanded executive power. But in the modern use of the term, the way people in the Federalist Society usually use it, it's interesting that the Federalist Society is now filled with small government conservatives, who I guess now that they're into Donald Trump are back to being big government conservatives, I guess. But it's an interesting contradiction. And just one more example of how, there's no federalism going on in the Federalist Society. They should all be objecting to Orrin Hatch's ideas about getting rid of the dual sovereignty rule with respect, at least, well, actually, he wants it gone across the board. That's pretty anti-federalist. But okay, Kavanaugh's critics viewed the issue less as a matter of his interpretation of the law than of his poor judgment or long history of partisanship. As a headstrong member of Ken Starr's independent counsel investigation, it just occurred to me as I'm reading the name of the office that Ken Starr occupied, the independent counsel. I know it's not the same usage of independent, but like I said, we've said all along, people who identify themselves as independents in polls that Greg brings to our attention, who are really just embarrassed to say they're conservative or Republicans. An independent counsel who's a partisan activist. Oh, boy. As a headstrong member of Ken Starr's independent counsel investigation, Kavanaugh advanced a maximalist view of a president's vulnerability to criminal investigations, only to completely reverse himself after working for President George W. Bush. Republican senators like Jeff Flake did not interpret that reversal as a reflection of Kavanaugh's partisanship, but were nevertheless alarmed that someone who had landed where Kavanaugh had landed might decide cases stemming from President Trump's extraordinary corruption. When, during Kavanaugh's initial confirmation hearing, Flake asked, should a president be able to use his authority to pressure executive or independent agencies to carry out directives for purely political purposes? Kavanaugh responded, I don't think we want judges commenting on the latest political controversy because that would lead the people to doubt whether we're independent or whether we're politicians in robes. So maintaining that strict independence of the judiciary requires me to, I think, to avoid commenting on any current events. So much for that. Flake will walk into the hearing room on Friday morning and likely cast the deciding vote on whether the Judiciary Committee should recommend Kavanaugh's confirmation. He told reporters Thursday, I want to give it some thought tonight. This is a tough decision. It really is. It should not be tough. Setting aside Kavanaugh's treatment of women, Kavanaugh shredded the claim to judicial independence that he used as an excuse to skate past Flake's questions and myriad other questions to get through his first hearing earlier this month. The fact that Kavanaugh can't be trusted to adjudicate Trump-related matters or any principally partisan matters is now abundantly clear. And so it is. All right, so let's see. That was one of the last two objections, and of course I've now entirely forgotten the final objection that I wanted to make, but well, that's a pretty good place to start. I wonder if I keep that open and look at the top of this report again, perhaps then I can remember that last one here. Oh, yes. Well, let's see. There was his partisanship getting in the way of things, and some other terrific thing, which I now can no longer remember. And maybe it'll occur to me later in my discussion of, the rest of this stuff. Yes. Now I remember. Thank you. I'm glad I remember. Thank you for reminding me. Just wanted to reiterate, in seeing the way the Associated Press noted the role of gender roles in this whole thing, there was also a New York Times piece on the same subject, or a similar subject, approach it from a similar direction. A high-stakes hearing, an advertisement, you're going to give me this now. A high-stakes hearing raises two voices, one quiet, Ford, one loud, Kavanaugh. This is, James Poniwozik's piece here, and we always apologize for possibly mangling his name and not even knowing whether we're doing it. From the Critic's Notebook over there in New York Times, it came down to she said, he screamed. At least he's not saying it's a he said, she said thing. She said, he screamed. For a week and a half, since Christine Blasey Ford was identified as having accused the Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her when they were in high school, America has heard everything about her and nothing from her. Get it? She was a name in a headline, a family photo, but until Thursday morning, the public had no idea what her voice sounded like. It was not the voice of someone burning to be where she was. I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. That was a credible statement. Flanked by lawyers, Dr. Blasey seemed tense, her breathing rapid, as she sat through opening remarks. Her voice was quiet, and when she began her remarks, so much so that the chairman, Senator Charles Grassley, a Republican, asked if she could move the microphone closer so that everyone could hear what he was interrupting when he was badgering her. Instead, or how he was digging his own grave by criticizing her and editorializing in between every question. Instead, in one of the most anticipated televised Senate hearings since Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas in 1991, she leaned in. Her voice broke as she described her terror when she said that after Judge Kavanaugh and a friend had trapped her in a bedroom, he held a hand over her mouth and tried to remove her clothes. You remember that accusation. He denies it, of course. It broke again when she described the indelible memory of the two teenage boys laughing, when she described escaping, when she recalled her husband later wondering when they were remodeling their house on why she insisted on two front doors. I didn't get to watch enough of the hearing to realize that was the case, but you can figure out exactly why that's happening. The Republican majority, hoping to salvage Mr. Kavanaugh's nomination, handed off Dr. Blasey's questioning to Rachel Mitchell. You know that story. This led to an odd questioning dynamic. Ms. Mitchell interviewed Dr. Blasey 5 minutes at a time, a serial cross-examination interrupted by episodic praise and boosting from Democratic senators. It was an unbalancing for a viewer and ultimately didn't add up to a larger arc. At the end, Ms. Mitchell apologetically said that the format was not ideal, but you get the idea here. And the difference in their demeanors, I think, leads us to a larger point, one I do want to make before we wrap things up, between what the AP had to say and what New York Times here has to say. Think about it. What I thought was really unique about the way they performed yesterday was that, like the immediacy, although really we have to check up on the news cycle on this one, the immediacy of the issue of whether or not he had even just watched her testimony. Like, I just literally watched it and then lied to you that I didn't. Although I now suspect that something is wrong with the removal of these posts. There was another aspect of the hearing that was also immediate demonstration of something really, really important, and I'm not sure people saw it. I'm sure they sensed it from seeing how she was quiet and cooperative in her demeanor, and Kavanaugh was belligerent and confrontational and angry and interrupting the women in particular. Take note of that. Because it occurred to me, like, after here's how I put it. After these performances, it's obviously impossible, as Republicans would have it, impossible to even imagine Brett Kavanaugh putting his hand over her mouth and then making demands of her. In other words, shutting her up like he tried to do with Amy Klobuchar, Senator Amy Klobuchar, and making demands of her, to which he had no entitlement whatsoever. How could you possibly imagine, him putting his hand over her mouth, making demands of her, and doing everything else that he can, and then afterwards, after preventing her from speaking, after preventing her from escape, she does what? She outwardly pretends that everything is normal, despite all the trauma involved, right? So it's impossible to imagine this belligerent, angry guy pinning a girl down and putting his hand over her mouth, telling her to shut up and making these demands of her that he's absolutely not entitled to. And she is, having finally escaped, still pretends nothing's wrong, outwardly acts as though everything's normal. How could you possibly imagine that he would do such a thing? And how could you possibly imagine that she would react in such a way? Why didn't you tell someone? The whole thing is being played out again right in front of your very eyes, and you still claim not to see it. I think you're lying when you do that, but there is the possibility that you're just that blind. I mean, after all, what did Orrin Hatch get quoted saying in the middle of the hallway? Not only were they filmed, Hatch and Cornyn and Graham caught on video laughing it up rather inappropriately in the middle of a hearing about sexual assault with the victim, right? But Hatch somehow ends up saying out in the hallway to reporters, who asked him, what did you think about Dr. Ford as a witness? He says, she's attractive. Ugh, what? No, you must mean something else. Like, in what sense do you mean that? I mean, she's very pleasing. Wow. They really are just like this through and through. Maybe, I guess. I just can't understand how you would miss it. The both performances, whether they were what came naturally to them both, or whether they were coached, or whether they were informed by gender role expectations, I don't know. But how you would miss it, how you could see those two performances and still come away saying, look, there's no way that all of a sudden nice guy Brett Kavanaugh, with all the experience we have with his previous, with all of our previous experience with his temperament, as the 65 women testified to or wrote in their letter, he's always behaved honorably and treated us with respect, right? There's no way such a person could suddenly become demanding and entitled and belligerent and try to shut women up. And if he did, there's no way that a woman strong enough to come here today to testify to us would remain outwardly calm in the face of it all, maybe for years to come, right? Except that we're just seeing it happen now. And we're even seeing in a position, it's happening in public. There's plenty of witnesses. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's every reason in the world for people like Senator Klobuchar and others to believe that they are fully empowered, if they need to dress this guy down. And he is in no position to be badgering the women in there, because he's in there begging for a job, and as he would have it, pleading for his life, for that matter. And yet, in the exchanges they had, even the questioners, even the women who were there empowered as questioners by the Constitution of the United States, no less, still had to, let's not blow my stack here. Even though he's asking me, have you ever been drunk? I'm just curious. Why don't you tell me? I'm curious. I want to know. Are you joking? And then the upshot of all this is like, how could anybody believe that I would do this to a woman? I'm so respectful of women. Aren't you? I'm curious. I want to know. Why don't you tell us about how respectful you are of women? Huh? It's like unbelievable. They've just played the whole scene out again in front of everybody, displaying exactly the attitudes that Republicans insist. I couldn't believe in a million years he would be like that. And why in the world would she be like that? If this had really happened to her, I wouldn't be. I know you wouldn't be. You're entitled to not be. That's your job, is to run around beating your chest and being manly about stuff. And her job is to shut up. And if something does happen, be nice about it. And if I say, shut up about it, then she should shut up. That's the way it should be. They just played the whole scene out again. I can't believe he would be like that. Well, he was just like that. I can't believe she would be like that. Well, she was just like that. Were you looking? Were you listening? Well, obviously, the answer is no. They were not. Okay. I don't know if there's any more I can squeeze out of this, but I felt like it's been a hell of a week. I got to say that. And it's really been valuable to me. I mean, it's almost therapeutic for me. I hope it's been valuable for you, reviewing a lot of the writing and the insights that we've gotten about all of this stuff. It was astonishing, to say the least. There's a couple more things, I guess, that we will throw in there. Here's one that's actually about Kavanaugh, just in case we see any action about this over the weekend. I think that we will not. I think that this will be ignored and or chucked very quickly. But just so you know, Ilana Shore, reporting for Politico on something Jeff Merkley has taken up. And I don't know what kind of update we have, if any, about what's going on with this. Jeff Merkley on Wednesday announced that he's seeking an injunction in federal court designed to stop a final vote on Brett Kavanaugh, asserting an obstruction of his constitutional duty to advise and consent on nominees. This sounds like a long shot. But let's take a further look at this. This is very interesting. Merkley's filing in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, that's I know some people there, comes as Senate Republicans vow to push ahead with a vote on President Donald Trump's Supreme Court nominee in the coming days and hours before a landmark hearing slated with, well, you remember, the people we've been talking about for the last 2 hours. Merkley's bid for an injunction hinges on the Senate's constitutional duty to provide advice and consent on nominees and charges that he's been prevented from fulfilling that due to the withholding of records on Kavanaugh's past service in the George W. Bush administration. That's his hook. The events of the past 10 days have only underscored how critical it is that the Senate conduct a careful and comprehensive review of a nominee before giving its consent, Merkley told Politico in a statement. And I have to agree. Obviously, there's a million reasons why you want to be able to have access to his entire record. And although they may make complaints about national security, deliberative process, executive privilege, etc., we've found evidence actually that pertains to the sexual assault allegation in the weirdest places, including some of the paperwork from his George W. Bush White House days. So why not take a look? There might really be something there, even if that's the only issue you're interested in. The unprecedented obstruction of the Senate's advice and consent obligation is an assault on the separation of powers and a violation of the Constitution. The President and Mitch McConnell want to ram through this nomination come hell or high water without real advice or informed consent by the Senate. That's true. But that's just not how our Constitution works. Although, unfortunately, some number of judges and maybe some number of Supreme Court justices might decide that it is. And then it will be. Ford's allegation is not directly cited in Merkley's filing, which is unlikely to succeed in stopping the vote, but the entrance of the Oregonian, who's indicated interest in a 2020 presidential bid, into the Kavanaugh debate further heightens the politically charged atmosphere shrouding the nomination. Merkley delivered a 15-hour floor speech last year in an ultimately failed bid to stop the confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. That's sort of kind of neither here nor there as an ending. On the merits, this complaint seems difficult to see it succeeding. I think that the courts will do anything not to rule on this and may just reject it as a political question and say it's up to the Senate to decide on this and to decide their own rules. But it's an interesting attempt anyway, and I would be shocked if it were to succeed, even without having to resort to finding 5 justices to just say, we want to be done with this thing. It's the sort of thing that judges are very likely to say, the Senate determines its own rules and you'll have to talk to them. And if they say the vote's going forward and the role of advice and consent has been fulfilled, then it is. It has been. And that's all there really is to it. But it's an interesting tactic. Another thing that we will take note of, just in case there's news about it over the weekend. Let's see. There's more Russian trolling activity ramping up, and I'm put on notice that apparently they are targeting all sorts of people, not just politicians, but activists who are prominent in the discussion of the Kavanaugh-Ford hearings as well. And let's see. New York Times had a piece the other day by Kevin Roos, is that right? Is a new Russian meddling tactic hiding in plain sight. So over the weekend, we'll read up on that, perhaps, and maybe discuss it a little bit next week. But I just want to let you know that that's on the radar and generating a lot of interest outside of, believe it or not, the Kavanaugh hearings. There's also a piece from The Guardian that is entitled, what do we got here? Russian U.S. tycoon boasted of active involvement in Trump election campaign. Luke Harding's piece for The Guardian. A little bit more troubling and nuanced, if only because we are talking about somebody who has, while born in Russia, has since gained American citizenship, I believe. And that's sort of a troubling subsection of the whole Russian meddling thing here. It's really like, it seems overly paranoid and like Cold War-ish. The way I originally felt about the Russia connection when it first started breaking as a story, the idea of like almost like sleeper agents, people who left the Soviet Union, became American citizens, and then suddenly decided that they would give over their time and effort to advancing the cause of the Russian government instead. It seems awfully difficult to pin a lot of belief to, but apparently Mueller is interested in several Russian-American figures and their interest in exercising what would, I guess, as American citizens, ordinarily be their right to influence American elections in more ways these days than ever before, thanks to courts, conservative courts like those on which Brett Kavanaugh sits and now seeks to sit. But that one's a little bit more troubling, but apparently a new angle of investigation here. So I pointed out in case something breaks over the weekend and necessitates discussion on Monday. And then once again, something else I want to return to at some point, and maybe the upcoming floor vote on Kavanaugh would be a good place to bring it up. Do want to actually return to reading the end of the profile of Leonard Leo and his connection to the Federalist Society, in case you've been, preoccupied with other things or plain old lazy and not finished reading it for yourself. I promised I would do it, and you have every right to hold me to it. It just might take me a year to get back to it. Okay. You might wonder to yourself, isn't this about the time in the program when this music comes on when David says, oh, by the way, there's a whole bunch of other stories out there besides the one I talked about, I indulged myself in for 2 hours, and we're going to make it Justice's responsibility to bring you that in the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, you're right. Good observation. You're a keen listener, and I commend you for it, because it is time to tell you what's coming up on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and I better get to it or I'll run out of time again. What's this? The captain of the Yale women's lacrosse and field hockey teams, is she singularly the captain of both? Congratulations. Said Kavanaugh lied from beginning to end about his drinking and behavior while they attended there. Oh, okay. So back then, the then captain of those two teams. Amazing. Well, I'd love to hear about that one, and you will if you stay tuned. Then, on the rest of the menu, a computer traced to the House of Representatives offices attempted to edit the Wikipedia entry for, pardon me, Devil's Triangle. I never heard of that one, by the way. To match what Kavanaugh claimed it meant, because that was in his yearbook entry, the GOP nominee for governor of Pennsylvania lost $631,000 in campaign money betting on the stock market. I heard about this, and so did Adam Bonin. This is
from Daily Kos Radio.
What the F?
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
I am so glad you picked this one up, Justice, because this really needs to be explored. This is the thing among Republicans. They collect campaign money and they invest it in the stock market and lose it. I didn't even know you could do that. What about this, though? The SEC also sued Elon Musk for fraud as it seeks to remove him from Tesla. Is that going on now? Amazing. Stay tuned to hear more.